The sun blazed down on the dusty New Mexico desert like the devil's own furnace. Summer of 1893 had come early and mean, bringing drought to land that already knew plenty of suffering. The air shimmered with heat, making the far-off mountains dance like ghosts in the distance. Jake Sullivan wiped sweat from his weathered face as he worked the rusty pump handle at his well. At 45, his once black hair was streaked with silver, matching the old scars that told stories of violence across his tanned skin. His hands, large and rough from years of hard living, moved with the ease of a man who'd learned to survive in harsh country. Water was life out here, and the dropping level in his well worried him more than he'd admit. The splash of water hitting the metal bucket gave him a moment's relief from the heavy silence surrounding his lonely ranch. 10 years he'd lived here now, a decade of being alone, broken only by trips to town for supplies and visits from Preacher Williams. 10 years of trying to find peace for sins that whispered to him in the dark. The crack of a distant gunshot froze Jake mid-motion. His head snapped up, eyes scanning the eastern tree line like a hawk watching for prey. The sound echoed across the valley, bouncing off canyon walls before fading into nothing. One shot, then another, then 3 quick pops. Jake straightened, the bucket forgotten as water spilled across his boots. His heart quickened with an old rhythm he knew too well, the beat of danger calling to a man who'd once answered with lead and steel. "Just go look," he muttered to himself, already moving toward the cabin. "Make sure nobody's hurt." The worn floorboard under his bed creaked as Jake lifted it, showing a small hidden space. The Winchester rifle lay there wrapped in oiled cloth, untouched for 10 years but kept clean as Sunday morning. Next to it sat a Colt revolver, ready as ever. Tools of death that had once been like extra limbs on his body. Jake's fingers hovered over the weapons, shaking slightly. He'd sworn never to kill again, promised Mary's memory he was done with that bloody life. But something, maybe instinct, maybe divine guidance, told him he needed to check on those shots. "Just to look," he whispered, knowing he was lying to himself. Nothing more. The Winchester felt both strange and familiar in his hands as he checked it with practiced skill. The Colt found its home in the holster at his hip, hidden under his long coat. Even in this heat, old habits died hard. His red mare nickered softly as he saddled her, maybe sensing his worry. He patted her neck, though his own heart stayed troubled. As he rode east toward those gunshots, Bible verses tumbled through his mind, prayers for mercy mixed with darker thoughts of judgment and revenge. The eastern woods were cooler, with ancient pine trees offering shelter from the brutal sun. Jake got down from his horse, tying her to a low branch before moving on foot. He walked silent through the brush, decades of tracking know-how guiding his steps. No broken twigs, no rustling leaves, a ghost among the trees. The smell of blood reached him before the sight did, that copper scent that brought back memories he'd tried to bury. The small clearing showed carnage that even Jake's battle-hardened eyes found hard to stomach. 3 men lay dead, their bodies twisted in the stillness that only violent death brings. 2 had been shot clean, entries that spoke of a skilled shooter. The 3rd had his throat cut, surprise frozen on his lifeless face. Jake looked over the area with a hunter's eye, noting signs of struggle, boot prints in the soft earth. An ambush maybe, or a deal gone bad. He was about to turn back, ride to town and tell the sheriff, when a soft moan caught his ear. She lay half-hidden under a juniper tree, her torn dress barely covering her beaten body. Young, no more than 25, with blonde hair matted dark with dirt and blood. Bruises covered her skin in sick patterns of purple and yellow. Her cracked lips moved slightly as Jake came closer. He knelt beside her, gently checking for wounds. A deep cut ran across her forehead, and her breathing came shallow and pained. As his shadow fell across her face, her eyes opened, clear blue, striking even in her broken state. "Easy now," Jake said softly, his voice rusty from not using it much. "I'm not gonna hurt you." The woman's gaze found his face with sudden clarity. Her cracked lips parted and she whispered in a voice like dry leaves blowing across stone, "I'm filthy, inside and out." The words hung in the still air between them, heavy with meaning Jake couldn't fully grasp but somehow understood. Then her eyes rolled back and she slipped away into darkness. Jake stayed frozen for a long moment, the woman's words echoing in his mind. Around him, the forest had gone quiet, as if holding its breath. 3 dead men, a broken woman, and him, a man who'd sworn to leave violence behind. Walk away, the thought came unbidden. This ain't your fight. Ride to town. Tell the sheriff. Let the law handle it. But even as these thoughts formed, Jake was already taking off his coat, gently wrapping it around the woman's broken form. Not out of being a hero, but because it was the right thing to do, the only thing Mary would have expected of him. He lifted the woman as carefully as he could, surprised by how light she was, as if suffering had hollowed her out. Her head fell against his chest, a small sound escaping her lips despite being unconscious. "You're safe now," he murmured, though he wasn't sure that was true for either of them. The ride back to the ranch was slow and careful, Jake holding the woman against him with one arm while guiding his horse with the other. The sun was starting its drop toward the western mountains by the time his weathered cabin came into view. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more untold western stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. Jake's spread wasn't much, a small cabin, a separate stable, a chicken coop, and a pen for the few horses he kept. A vegetable garden struggled against the drought behind the cabin. It wasn't wealth, but it was honest living, far removed from the blood money of his old life. Inside the cabin, Jake laid the woman gently on his bed, the only proper place for her to rest. He worked steadily, heating water on the wood stove, gathering clean rags and the few medical supplies he kept. The routine felt familiar from his days as a scout during the war, when field doctoring had often fallen to him. As he cleaned her wounds, Jake took note of her injuries with the cold eye of experience. The violence done to her went beyond cuts and bruises. Her wrists showed rope burns, her arms had needle marks. Whoever had held her had done so for some time, and with cruel purpose. Anger, cold and familiar, stirred in Jake's chest. He pushed it down. That path led to darkness he'd fought 10 years to escape. Yet as he bandaged a deep cut on the woman's arm, his hands shook with held-back rage. Some sins, he thought grimly, deserve judgment more than forgiveness. With the woman's wounds cleaned and wrapped, Jake covered her with a quilt and stepped outside onto the cabin's small porch. The setting sun painted the land in shades of gold and amber, beauty at the end of a day marked by ugliness. He lit a cigarette, a rare treat, and listened to the evening sounds of the desert waking as the heat let up. From inside, he could hear the soft sounds of the woman's troubled sleep, small whimpers and unclear words, not screams, but the quieter sounds of a broken soul trying to find its way back. Jake looked up at the coming stars, their cold light offering no answers to his unspoken questions. What had happened to her? Who were the dead men? And what did he owe her now? "What would you have me do, Mary?" he whispered to the gathering darkness. His late wife had been gone 15 years now, yet he still found himself asking for her guidance in moments of doubt. Mary had been his moral compass, his link to goodness during his darkest days as a bounty hunter. Her death had nearly destroyed him, sent him on a 3-year spiral of violence and revenge that only ended when he realized how far he'd strayed from her ideals. The stars offered no answer, but as Jake stood thinking, a gentle breeze stirred, unexpected in the still evening air. It brushed against his face like a soft touch, bringing memories of Mary's hand. For just a moment, he could almost feel her presence, real as the wooden rail under his hands. The feeling passed quickly, but it left Jake with a sense of certainty. The woman sleeping in his cabin had been put in his path for a reason. Maybe this was his chance for redemption, to save a life instead of taking one. With new determination, Jake went back inside the cabin. By lamplight, he wrote a short note to Preacher Williams, the only person in these parts who knew his true past. The message was simple: found a wounded woman. Need your advice. Come when you can. J. At first light, he'd ride to the edge of town and find one of the local boys to deliver it. For now, he settled into the wooden chair beside the bed, Winchester across his lap, ready for a long night of watchful waiting. Dawn brought no improvement in the woman's condition. She stayed unconscious, her breathing shallow, her skin hot with fever. Jake bathed her forehead with cool water and got small amounts of broth between her dry lips. By noon, he knew he needed help beyond his limited medical knowledge. Reluctantly leaving the woman alone, Jake rode to the outskirts of Redemption, the small town that served as the only civilization within 30 miles of his ranch. He avoided the main street, instead finding young Billy Carter cleaning stables behind his father's general store. "Need you to take a message to Preacher Williams," Jake said, pressing the folded note and a silver dollar into the boy's hand. "It's important, Billy. Just for the preacher's eyes." "Yes, sir, Mr. Sullivan," the boy replied, eyes wide at the generous payment. "I'll take it straight away. And Billy," Jake added, his voice dropping lower, "no need to mention to anyone you saw me today." The boy nodded seriously, understanding without being told that keeping quiet was part of what he was being paid for. When Jake returned to the cabin, he found the woman awake, though clearly confused. She had pulled herself from the bed and now sat huddled in the corner of the room, clutching a feed sack like it was the last soft thing in the world. Her eyes, wide with fear, tracked his every move. "I won't hurt you," Jake said softly, keeping his distance. "You're safe here." The woman didn't respond, but her grip on the feed sack loosened slightly. Jake moved slowly, placing medical supplies on the table before backing away again. "You've been hurt," he continued. "You need rest and medicine. Will you let me help you?" After a long moment, the woman gave a barely seen nod. Her gaze stayed wary, but need overcame fear. Jake helped her back to the bed, gave her fever powder with water, and redressed her wounds. All the while, he kept respectful distance whenever possible, his movements slow and unthreatening. As evening came, the woman spoke for the first time since those initial words in the forest. "Why didn't you touch me?" she asked, her voice still rough but stronger than before. Jake paused in his task of building up the fire, thinking about her question. The answer came with simple clarity. "Because no one should have," he replied, meeting her gaze directly. Something shifted in the woman's face. Not quite a smile, but a lessening of the fear in her eyes. Her lower lip trembled slightly, showing emotions kept tightly controlled. She looked away, but not before Jake caught the shine of tears she wouldn't let fall. That night, the woman slept by the fire rather than hiding in the barn, as Jake had half expected. He again took his place in the chair, keeping his careful watch. Outside, coyotes howled in the distance, their mournful cries echoing across the empty land. Inside the cabin, a fragile trust had begun to form, delicate as spider silk, but real nonetheless. Preacher Samuel Williams arrived the following afternoon, his old mule wheezing from the journey. At 65, the preacher was still strong, his white beard and weathered face giving him the look of an Old Testament prophet. Before finding God, Williams had been a cavalry sergeant, a fact clear in his straight posture and sharp gaze as he got down from his mount. "Jake," he greeted, his voice deep and strong. "Your message was troubling." "She's inside," Jake replied with a nod toward the cabin. "Awake but still weak." The preacher followed Jake into the cabin, removing his hat respectfully as he entered. The woman was sitting up in bed, watching their entrance with careful eyes. "This is Preacher Williams," Jake explained. "He's a friend. He can be trusted." The preacher approached slowly, pulling a chair beside the bed but leaving comfortable space between them. "I'm glad to see you recovering, my dear," he said gently. "Would you feel comfortable telling us your name?" The woman hesitated, her gaze moving between the two men. "Sarah," she finally said. "Sarah Belle." "Miss Belle," the preacher acknowledged with a small nod. "You're among friends here. Jake has told me how he found you, but nothing more. Would you care to share what happened?" Sarah's hands twisted in the quilt covering her lap. I don't remember much," she admitted, frustration clear in her voice. "I was working. I'm a teacher for a family in Chicago. The Calhounds." Then nothing clear, just pieces. "Men taking me, a dark room." Her breathing quickened. "Pain. So much pain." Preacher Williams raised a calming hand. It's all right, Miss Belle. The mind sometimes protects us from what it can't bear to remember. While they spoke, Jake had noticed something sticking out from the pocket of his coat, which now hung beside the door. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed and creased from handling. Opening it showed handwriting, neat but hurried. "Is this yours?" he asked, turning toward Sarah. She frowned, shaking her head slowly. "I don't know. I don't remember writing anything." Jake handed her the page. "It was in your pocket when I found you." Sarah took the paper with shaking fingers. As she read, the color drained from her face. "The judge knows everything," she read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "Cole is coming. Only I remain." She looked up, confusion and fear warring in her expression. "I don't understand. I don't remember writing this. Does the name Cole mean anything to you?" Preacher Williams asked gently. At the name, Sarah visibly flinched, though confusion remained in her eyes. "I don't know, but it feels..." She struggled for words. "It feels wrong. Dangerous." Jake and the preacher exchanged a meaningful look. Whatever had happened to Sarah Belle went beyond a simple attack. The dead men in the forest, the mysterious note, her lost memory, all pointed to something more sinister. "You're safe here for now," Jake assured her, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. "Rest. Get your strength back. Memory often returns with time." After making sure Sarah had food and water within reach, the two men stepped outside to speak privately. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard as they walked toward the horse pen. "This is trouble, Jake," Williams said without beating around the bush. "Deep trouble." "I know," Jake replied, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. "But what was I supposed to do? Leave her there?" The preacher sighed heavily. "No, that wouldn't be your way, despite what you'd have people believe." He stroked his beard thoughtfully. "The note mentions a judge. Could be Judge Montgomery in town. He's the only judge for 100 miles. Respectable man," Jake observed. "Church-going, generous to widows and orphans by all accounts." "Yes," Williams agreed, his tone thoughtful. "Very careful about his public image." He turned to face Jake directly. "I'll make some quiet inquiries. In the meantime, keep her hidden. If what she witnessed was important enough for men to die over, others will be looking for her." As the preacher prepared to leave, he placed a weathered hand on Jake's shoulder. "Be careful, old friend. You left that life behind for good reason." "I'm just helping a wounded woman," Jake protested. Williams' expression remained grave. "The path to hell is often paved with good intentions. And the path back to your old ways might be shorter than you think." With those sobering words, the preacher departed, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts and an unconscious woman who carried secrets dangerous enough to kill for. Over the next week, Sarah's condition improved steadily. The fever broke, her wounds began to heal, and color returned to her thin features. She grew stronger, moving from bed to chair, then carefully around the cabin. Jake kept his distance while staying watchful of her needs, preparing simple meals and providing clean clothes. One morning, Jake found Sarah standing unsteadily before the small mirror hanging near the washbasin. She was trying to brush her matted hair, wincing as the comb caught in the tangles. "Let me help," Jake offered, approaching slowly. Sarah tensed but handed him the comb after a moment's hesitation. Jake worked with surprising gentleness, carefully working out the knots without causing pain. His large hands, capable of such violence in another life, moved with delicate care. "You've done this before," Sarah observed, watching him in the mirror. A shadow passed across Jake's features. "For my wife. She had beautiful hair, long like yours, dark as a raven's wing." "What happened to her?" Sarah asked softly. Jake's hands stilled momentarily. "She died 15 years ago." The words were clipped, final. A door firmly closed. Sarah didn't press further. That evening, as they sat before the fire sharing a simple meal of rabbit stew, Sarah spoke of her life before the gaps in her memory. She was the daughter of a literature professor at Northwestern University in Chicago, educated beyond what was common for women of her time. After her father's death, she had taken a position as teacher to the Calhoun family's 3 children. They seemed like the perfect family, she said, her gaze distant. Mr. Calhoun is a prominent banker. Mrs. Calhoun is active in society and charity work. The children were well behaved, if a bit sheltered. Her brow furrowed. But there was something off about the household. Rules that made no sense. Rooms I wasn't allowed to enter. Conversations that stopped when I approached. When did you disappear? Jake asked. Sarah shook her head in frustration. I don't know. The last clear memory I have is teaching little Alice her letters in early April. Then fragments, a cellar, I think. Men I didn't know. Pain. She set down her bowl, appetite gone. And fear. Constant fear. That night, Sarah's nightmares began in earnest. Jake woke to her screams, finding her tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, fighting invisible attackers. He approached carefully, speaking her name until she woke fully, wild-eyed and trembling. The children, she gasped, clutching at Jake's arm with surprising strength. In the basement. So many children crying in the dark. It was just a dream, Jake soothed, though doubt colored his words. Sarah's eyes cleared, the fog of nightmare fading. No, she whispered. A memory, I think. I think I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. The implications hung heavy in the air between them. If her fragmented memories were indeed real rather than nightmares, the danger to Sarah, and now to Jake by association, was far greater than either had initially realized. 3 days later, everything changed. Jake was chopping wood when he heard approaching horses. He signaled to Sarah, who was hanging laundry, and she quickly retreated inside. Jake positioned himself casually beside the wood pile, where the Winchester leaned within easy reach. The 3 riders who appeared around the bend were not, as Jake had feared, deputies or hired guns. But they weren't friendly visitors either. The lead rider was a well-dressed man with cold eyes and an expensive suit that looked out of place in frontier territory. Mr. Sullivan, the man called out, reining in his horse. I'm Cole Garrett, representing certain interests in Chicago. I believe you have something that belongs to my employers. Jake's blood ran cold. This was the Cole mentioned in Sarah's note, the one that had made her flinch with fear. Don't know what you're talking about, Jake replied evenly, his hand moving casually closer to the Winchester. Garrett's thin smile held no warmth. Miss Sarah Belle. She was taken from us during a business disagreement. We're here to retrieve our property. Don't see any property here, Jake said, his voice hardening. And I don't see any badges, so you best move along. The 2 men flanking Garrett shifted in their saddles, hands moving to their guns. But Garrett held up a hand, stopping them. Now, Mr. Sullivan. Or should I say, Mr. Sinclair? Garrett's smile widened at Jake's slight reaction to his real name. Yes, we know who you are. The famous bounty hunter. Retired, they say, but old habits die hard, don't they? That life's behind me, Jake said quietly. Is it? Garrett pulled out a folded paper. Judge Montgomery has issued a warrant for Miss Belle's arrest. Seems she's wanted for theft and assault in Chicago. As duly appointed agents of the court, we're here to collect her. Jake knew it was a lie. The paper was probably fake, and these men were no lawmen. But they had the advantage of numbers and official-sounding authority. Even if that's true, Jake said carefully, I told you, there's no woman here. Garrett's expression hardened. We'll see about that. Boys, search the property. That's when Sarah appeared in the cabin doorway, the Colt revolver steady in her hands. I remember now, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. All of it. Garrett's confident expression faltered slightly. Miss Belle, you're coming with us. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. I remember the children, Sarah continued, not lowering the gun. In the basement. The ledgers with names and prices. The judge's signature on the sale papers. Fantasies of a disturbed mind, Garrett said smoothly, but Jake could see the worry in his eyes. You need medical attention. I need justice, Sarah replied. For those children you sold. For Samuel Weathers' daughter. For all of them. Jake saw the moment Garrett decided to stop talking and start shooting. The man's hand moved to his gun, but Jake was faster. The Winchester came up in one smooth motion, and Jake's shot took Garrett in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. The other two men drew their weapons, but Sarah's Colt barked twice, and both men fell. Jake stared at her in amazement. Her shooting was clean and sure, nothing like the broken woman he'd found under that tree. Garrett lay groaning in the dirt, clutching his wounded shoulder. Jake walked over and kicked his gun away. Now then, Jake said calmly, let's talk about those children. It took 2 days of careful questioning, but they got the whole story from Garrett. The Cowhounds were running a network that bought orphaned and abandoned children, cleaned them up, and sold them to wealthy families as servants or to mining companies as cheap labor. Judge Montgomery provided the legal paperwork to make it all look legitimate. Sarah had discovered the operation by accident when she found the children hidden in the Calhoun's cellar. When she tried to help 2 of them escape, Garrett caught her. They'd brought her west to silence her permanently, but the men tasked with killing her had gotten greedy and started fighting over her instead. We have to stop them, Sarah said as they prepared to ride to Santa Fe with their evidence. Those children are still suffering. We will, Jake promised. But first we need to get this information to the territorial governor. He's got the authority to shut down Montgomery and wire Chicago about the Cowhounds. They rode hard for 3 days, Garrett tied to his saddle and complaining about his wound the whole way. The territorial governor, when presented with the evidence and Garrett's confession, acted swiftly. Federal marshals were dispatched to Chicago while local authorities moved against Judge Montgomery. Within a month, the whole network was exposed. The children were freed, the Cowhounds were arrested, and Montgomery was stripped of his position and jailed. Sarah testified before a federal grand jury, her clear memory of events now fully restored. Jake stood outside the courthouse in Santa Fe, watching Sarah emerge from giving her final testimony. She looked different, stronger, more confident, but also peaceful in a way he hadn't seen before. It's over, she said, joining him on the courthouse steps. The legal part, Jake agreed. What will you do now? Sarah looked out at the bustling territorial capital, then back at Jake. I've been thinking about that. Those children will need proper homes, real families. Someone needs to oversee their placement, make sure they're truly safe. Sounds like important work, Jake said. It is. Sarah turned to face him fully. I could use help. Someone who knows how to track down missing children, how to evaluate whether a family is genuine or not. Jake studied her face, seeing the invitation there. I'm not sure I'm the right man for that kind of work. You saved my life, Jake. You chose mercy over revenge when you could have killed Garrett and his men. You chose justice over personal safety. Sarah's voice was soft but certain. Mary would be proud of the man you've become. Jake felt something loosen in his chest, a weight he'd carried for 15 years finally beginning to lift. Maybe redemption wasn't about hiding from his past, but using it to build something better. Well, he said with the ghost of a smile, I suppose I could try my hand at saving lives instead of taking them. Sarah smiled back, the first truly happy expression he'd seen on her face. I was hoping you'd say that. As they walked down the courthouse steps together, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in years, hope. Not just for himself, but for all the lost children they might help, all the families they might reunite. The road to redemption, it turned out, wasn't a destination but a journey. And for the first time since Mary's death, Jake Sullivan wasn't walking it alone. Behind them, the sun set over the New Mexico territory, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Ahead lay uncertainty, challenges, and the hard work of building something good from the ashes of past mistakes. But Jake had learned something important in those days with Sarah. Sometimes the best way to heal your own wounds is to help heal someone else's. And maybe, just maybe, that was what Mary had been trying to tell him all along.